Welcome back to Sports Class with Dr. K. It's mid-October and that can mean only one thing. It's time for tanking for Tua. As the NFL season nears its midway point, the fate of many teams appears to be already sealed. Teams like the Redskins and Dolphins, they're tanking for Tua. They're on their way to lose to see who can get the first draft pick in next year's draft. But what about other teams? What about the Pittsburgh Steelers? What about the Jets or the Bengals? Can these teams turn it around and make a playoff run? If your team is out of it, please subscribe. For the rest of you guys, tune in and let's see if your team has a chance to make that turnaround and make that playoff run. We're going to talk about a number of different examples of how this is done. I want to start with a team in 2011 that some of you guys may remember. If you're struggling to remember, I'll mention two words and it'll come back to you. Tim Tebow, 2011 Denver Broncos. This team was in desperation mode a month into the season. They were 0-4, fired their head coach, struggling team. Then their starting quarterback gets injured and they send in Tim Tebow, trying to spark some excitement in the team, a little bit of energy. They didn't expect to turn this thing around and make the playoffs. They didn't know Tim Tebow. Tebow comes in and starts to work his magic. It seemed like every week they were making a last-minute comeback to win games. He really wasn't playing all that well, but they were managing to win. Next thing you know, the team finishes at 8-8, squeaks into the playoffs. But that might be when Tebow saved his greatest magic. One of the more memorable games in recent playoff memory, playing against the defending Super Bowl champions, the Pittsburgh Steelers, as huge underdogs. And yet, the Broncos hung in there, pulled the game into overtime, and Tim Tebow connected on an 80-yard pass with Demaryius Thomas to win the game. Now, that was the end of the run for Tebow and the Broncos. But that legend will go down in history as one of the NFL's greats, and many people even now wish that Tim Tebow would make another comeback. Well, Tim Tebow's not the only quarterback story in these turnaround teams. In fact, changing quarterbacks is one of the secret recipes for turning your team around if you're struggling early on. The next couple of examples are certainly true of that. The 1980 Oakland Raiders looked like a team at the end of their run. A lot of the Hall of Fame greats from the 70s were retired by that point. Ken Stabler was gone, Fred Biletnikoff was gone, and others. But they pulled out one last run in 1980. The first handful of games, they were led by sort of unknown quarterback Dan Pastorini. The team was going nowhere. They were 2-3 in that season. That fifth game, a loss against the Chiefs, and Dan Pastorini went down with a gruesome broken leg injury. So in came the backup quarterback, former #1 draft pick, Jim Plunkett. Well, much like Tim Tebow, people didn't know about Jim Plunkett and his heroics. Plunkett began leading this team on the comeback trail, rattling off 6 straight victories and finishing the season at 11-5. Unlike Tebow, Plunkett's run didn't end with a playoff loss. This team continued their march through the playoffs, beating the Browns in the first round, then the Chargers in the AFC Championship game, and going all the way to a Super Bowl victory against the Philadelphia Eagles, winning that game 27-10. This is one of the most shocking turnarounds in NFL history. What else happened in 1980? You are certainly wondering at this point. Well, both the video game Pac-Man and the Rubik's Cube made their debuts. The 1998 Buffalo Bills forged a similar turnaround story, and again, there's a famous quarterback at the center of this story. With Hall of Fame quarterback Jim Kelly retired and many of the other greats of those Bills teams of the late 80s and early 90s gone, the Bills were struggling early in the 1998 season. Unknown quarterback Rob Johnson leading this team nowhere. They started the season 0-3, and Johnson lingered on until week 6 when he was knocked out of a game against Indy with an injury. Enter the wily veteran Doug Flutie. Flutie, of course, was a college superstar and had a great career in the Canadian Football League. But he'd never really been given much of a chance in the NFL until this moment. Now he comes in, leads the team to a dramatic comeback in that game against Indianapolis, and then led them to victories in 7 of their last 8 games. The Bills made the playoffs with a record of 10-6, and even though their run ended there, they didn't have any playoff heroics, it still marked one of the great turnarounds in NFL history. Let's look at one last example. It's not exactly an in-season turnaround, but it does involve a change of fate from the middle of the season to the end, and it also involves the most lopsided victory in NFL history. On November 17, 1940, the Washington Redskins defeated the Chicago Bears 7-3. At the end of that game, the Redskins held the Bears with a dramatic goal line stand in the final moments, stopping the Bears from scoring what would have been the go-ahead touchdown. Redskins owner George Marshall, in the aftermath of the game, was so excited he shouted, "The Bears are a bunch of crybabies. The Bears are quitters." Is this the first example of bulletin board material in sports? Probably not, but it certainly gave motivation to the Bears and their famous head coach George Halas, who used those quotes to motivate the team the next time these teams played, which happened to be 3 weeks later in the NFL championship game. Washington won the NFL's East Division, Chicago won the West, and they played in the NFL championship on December 8, 1940. What else happened in 1940, by the way? Well, Frank Sinatra made his singing debut in Indianapolis on February 2nd. And also, this NFL championship game. Halas had posted in the locker room newspaper clippings that included those quotes from Marshall and his inflammatory comments. The team got all fired up, charged out onto the field, and the Bears were not going to be stopped by the Redskins on that day. They completely shut down the Redskins' offense all day long. Washington was held to a total of 5 rushing yards. They threw 8 interceptions and had only 231 total yards compared to the Bears' 519. The game really got out of hand in the third quarter when the Redskins threw 3 interceptions, all of which the Bears returned for touchdowns. Now, Bears coach George Halas, who was still fuming over Marshall's comments, never let up. Even when his team was ahead 66-0 in the final minutes, and Halas ordered his team to score one last time. They scored their final touchdown. One other quirky note from this game. They almost ran out of footballs. This was in the days before they had a net behind the goalpost to catch the balls, and so every time the Bears scored and kicked an extra point, the ball went sailing up into the stands, and the fans refused to return them to the field. The Bears scored so many times that by their second-to-last touchdown, there was only 1 football left, and so officials ordered the team to either run or pass for their extra point, because if they kicked it, there would be no more balls to finish the game. So for the last 2 touchdowns they scored, the Bears couldn't kick the extra point. So, it's an odd historical note, but the most lopsided victory in NFL history came against a team that had beaten them just a couple of weeks before. So, if your team has struggled so far in this season, don't give up hope just yet. There's still time for your team with a change in quarterback, with renewed enthusiasm, or just finding their mojo to turn things around and make that playoff run. And if your team has dropped a game against one of the favorites in the league, don't give up hope either. Remember the 1940 Bears, they might still turn it around and win the championship. There are plenty of other great turnaround stories in NFL history. Tell me about your favorite in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. I think we have a caller. Welcome to Sports Class with Dr. K.
Hi, Dr. K, long-time listener, second-time caller.
Welcome.
Yeah, I'm a huge Dolphin fan, and this season so far is not going very well. Can you give me some optimism?
There's always next year.